Good morning again. Sorry I have a little bit of a cough this morning. I think I'm allergic to Rendell's aftershave. Okay. We're going to talk about the church and the world today. We talk about it a lot. I don't know if you've given it a lot of thought, but even if you're the most dedicated Christian, you attend all church services. Anytime those doors are unlocked, you're walking through them. You still spend more time with people of the world than you do with Christians, if you define the world as those not being members of the Lord's church. Then the vast majority of our time is spent with worldly people. And we know the Bible tells us we are to be in the world, but not of the world. And there's a huge difference. We work with those people. We go to school with them. We're surrounded by them when we go out on social functions or events. They're just all around us, and that's why they're called the world. What is the Christian's relationship to the world? What relationship does the church sustain, and are we supposed to sustain with the world? Since we spend most of our time in it, we should deal with that question. And that's what we're going to do right now. Maybe part of the reason that we're not exactly sure in our own minds sometimes what the church's relationship to the world is because of the broad use of the word world. It can get confusing. A brief example, the word up. Simple little word. You get up in the morning, you get cleaned up, you get dressed up, you go to work, you open up, then you tidy up, then you lock up at the end of the day and head up the street to fill your gas tank up while you're on the way up to the house. Up. World is as versatile as up. How would you define the word world? Well, it has lots of meanings. There's actually two Greek words, in the Bible that are translated world. One of them is the word that's been brought into the English language and is fairly familiar to us. That's cosmos. That's the Greek word for world. It basically means an ordered system. Sounds like an oxymoron, though, doesn't it? The world we live in isn't all that orderly anymore. But that's what cosmos meant. An orderly arrangement. The other Greek word that's translated to world is ion, I-O-N, which means an age. That's why in some versions of the Bible, like the King James Version, you may read the word world and then read the word age in another version. In the same scriptures. They are interchangeable. But you'll find the word world used in many different ways, both in the Bible as well as our own modern day use of the language. For instance, the world means the inhabited earth. No one can dispute that. In Mark 16:15, Jesus told his disciples, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Well, there's a no-brainer, the inhabited world. If it's not inhabited, why are you going out there if there's nothing to preach to? So Jesus' statement there was an acknowledgement that the world meant the inhabited world, earth. What did Jesus mean there by that world? Obviously, he meant go where the people are, that part of the world. In some cases in the Bible, the word world simply meant the Roman Empire, because that was the world that Jesus and his disciples lived in. In Luke 2 and verse 1, the Bible says Caesar sent out a decree that all the world should be registered. That wouldn't have applied to an uninhabited areas of the world, would it? In other words, they were to go back to their hometowns and sign up people to be taxed. All the inhabitants. Who was it that was subject to the tax? The citizens, the inhabited empire world, or Roman Empire world. Luke 2:1 says all the world should be taxed or registered. But in that particular usage, it simply referred to the Roman Empire, didn't it? Wasn't referring to Georgia and South Carolina, did he? In the Bible, we'll also find that the word world also refers to the reign of the Messiah. In Hebrews 2 and 5, it uses it that way. It says there, "For he has not put the world to come, of which we speak, but is in subjection to angels," or has not put that world to come in subjection to angels. He's saying that God did not put the world to come, of which we speak, into subjection to angels. What did he mean by the world to come there? We might think he means the eternal ages, but that's not really the way Jesus used that term. And in the book of Hebrews, it is written to Jewish Christians. The world to come was a saying among the Jews that they understood to mean the age of the Messiah. And that, of course, is the Christian age, the Christian world. So Paul talks about the world to come to the Jews, but to them that would mean the age of the Messiah, which for us is already here. The world also sometimes means the human race. In John 3:17, Jesus said, "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved." World there obviously meant the human race, mankind, us. Sent not his Son to condemn the world, it said. Well, of course he wouldn't condemn the earth or the planet, would he? The inhabitants, the people. How could the earth sin or do anything at all to warrant condemnation? It can't. The world in that usage was the human race in general. Also, figuratively, we use the word world for a subdivision or a subsystem of mankind. Think about that. We talk about the third world countries, the entertainment world, the sports world, the world of politics, the educational or academic world. Well, we're talking about a subsystem, an orderly arrangement, yes, but still a subsystem of mankind in general, right? Yeah. But the meaning that we're essentially dealing with in this lesson today is the meaning that is contemplated when you think about the sphere of Satan's power, the world with which we have to deal as Christians, and the world from where the question comes, what is the church's relationship to the world supposed to be? It's an interesting question. The sphere of Satan's influence is the meaning that is contemplated by John when he wrote 1 John chapter 2 and verse 15, where he said, "Do not love the world or the things in the world." What did John mean here by world? Obviously, he didn't mean the birds, the flowers, the earth, and so on, although we do love those things. They're reminders of God's creative mastery and His beauty. But John says, do not love the world. Well, in the next verse, he defined what he meant by world. Remember, we've studied about this before. In every verse, pay attention to the verse before it and the verse after it. In verse 16 of 1 John and 2, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. Well, he's talking about Satan's sphere of influence, isn't he? If it's of the world, then it's of Satan, not of God. So the world is the system that is where Satan has control. And that sadly includes most of mankind, doesn't it? The church stands almost as an isolated island, you could say, in a sea of worldly people. Most of the people of the world are under Satan's control. Now, they don't know it in some cases. They don't like to admit, and they wouldn't believe it if you told them, but they are under Satan's control. If they're not allowing God to control them through Jesus, then they are allowing Satan to control them. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. If you're not for me, you're against me. Didn't Jesus say that? So if you're not for the Lord and not a member of the saved world, then you're against the Lord by the Lord's own definition. So what then is the church's relationship to the world or to the rest of mankind as it's contemplated here supposed to be? We've got to avoid that world of Satan. After all, it is evil. It consists of the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. In other words, it's the sphere or the realm or the world of sin. How do we relate to people who are in the world? Well, the first thing we learned, and what must be clearly and emphatically stated, is that the Lord intended for His people to live in the world, but not to become of the world. We live and work and study among these worldly people in the world who are subject and submissive to Satan, and that's what the Lord intends for us to do. Remember what He said, go into all the world. He didn't say go to the world. Go into it. Get in there and get her done, as Larry the cable guy would say. In Matthew 5:14, Jesus said, you are the light of the world, a city that's set on a hill that cannot be hidden. Members of the church and churches themselves have always felt a desire to flee from that ugly old world that's around us, haven't we? To withdraw from it and find a controlled environment so we can be away from all this sin and ugliness that's going around us, the wickedness. That's a natural feeling or instinct, though. We want to retreat and only live among Christians. So that's just a natural tendency. Wouldn't that be nice and easy and comfortable? In Jesus' day, there was a sect of Jews called the Essenes. We know very little about them. You know why? They withdrew from society. They was fed up with it. They lived in some caves not too far outside Jerusalem there somewhere. But they withdrew from the rest of the Jewish society. They just left, disappeared. They lived in caves. There were about 4,000 of them, we know that, as near as anyone can figure. And it was the Essenes who gave us the Dead Sea Scrolls. They wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, put them up in clay jars, and they were found some 1,900 years, I think it was, later, or 900 years, somewhere around there. But the Essenes were a very closed and controlled society. Old Flavius Josephus, by the way, was able to give us most of what we know about the Essenes, or most of what I know anyway. In medieval times, people who thought they were doing God's service became monks and nuns, fled to the shelters of monasteries or caves or convents. In modern times, you have the Amish people, the Shakers, various other cults of people who go off to themselves and withdraw from society because of the impurities that are in the world around them, or because they are so insecure the world around them is fed up with them. So they just withdraw and hide. And even in the Lord's church, people are not immune to the temptation or the urge to just withdraw from some people and places. Sometimes I think we just develop a stained glass mentality. We get the idea that the church is the fortress and we're inside and the world is outside, and we're going to keep it outside, and that's just fine. We're in here, they're out there. Let's keep it that way. We don't want to mix and mingle and be exposed to the wicked temptations that's all around us in the world. Well, now, as far as being exposed to the wickedness and the temptations of the world, it is not the Lord's intent for us to be isolated from that. Think about that. He wants us, you and me, to get out there in that world and influence that world. Let's read a little bit more fully what he said in Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot, the foot of man. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. You're the salt of the earth. But if you, as a Christian, withdraw from society and the world around you, you've become tasteless, like tasteless salt. That's what he's saying. Now, that doesn't appear to be optional, does it, what he said there? Does it appear to be optional? No. Right here is what the Lord wants us to do, and right there is the Christian's relationship to the world in Matthew 5:13 through 16. That's what our relationship to the world is to be. He said, you're the salt of the earth. What does salt do? It flavors and preserves, doesn't it? But it must come into contact with something in order to improve its flavor or to preserve it. Does no good in the salt can or the salt shaker. You got to get out there and shake things up and spread it around. There has to be contact. If you like salty food, you can't keep the salt in the shaker or in the cabinet. So Christians have to have contact with the world. Jesus said, we're the light of the world. Verse 14, we're supposed to light the world up with His light, which is His truth. We're supposed to light the world and point the way to the Father, as well as lead the way He also said we are a city that's built on a hill. You can't hide a city built on a hill, especially when people start turning the lights on. We, the church, we Christians, are that city set on the hill. We stand out, we shine, or reflect the same light we've absorbed. We have contact with the world. In verse 15, he says, when you light a candle, do you put it under a basket where it can't be seen? No, you don't. You put it on a candlestick or a lampstand so it can be seen by everybody. So we're his light, we're his salt, his flavorful, preserving salt. Do you have co-workers or classmates or worldly friends or neighbors? Yeah, I know you do. Do they know that you're a Christian? Do they know the pathway to heaven? We're supposed to be out influencing the world. Imagine how much worse the world condition would be if there were no Christian influence in it at all. And I know it seems to be dwindling, doesn't it? But now we've got to take one thing crystal clear. While the church is to be in the world, and the Christian is to be in the world is not to be in the church at all. We can't make that a two-way street. Jesus made it clear that we're to go out and be in the world, but he's just as clear that the world is not to influence us or to be in the church, the body of Christ, which is us. It's just like a man's boat. You go out fishing, as long as the boat's in the water and everything's all fine and dandy. Once the water gets in the boat, you're going to sink, aren't you? It's not fine and dandy anymore. Got to keep the water out of your fishing boat, and you got to keep the world out of the church. We've got to guard ourselves and be very vigilant, because the wickedness of the world is always right there, cleverly camouflaged, trying to tempt us and trip us up, to corrupt us and the church. In James 4 and verse 4, James had a plain way of putting things. He said, "You adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility towards God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God." That's pretty clear layman's terms, isn't it? Now, doesn't it sound as though it contradicts everything we've just been studying about, though? No, it doesn't. Jesus said, I want you to be the light of the world. He didn't say, I want you to be like the world. I want you to be like the salt. Don't leave that world flavorless. Give it some flavor. Spice it up. Preserve what I've implanted in you. But don't become a friend of the world. When you befriend someone, you accept them, don't you? You approve of them. That's why you accepted them as a friend. You've accepted them into your life. We need to remember and constantly remind ourselves that the world belongs to Satan. It is his. He is the owner and operator of it. The church has an owner and operator too. His name are Jesus. The world and the church are different principalities, different principles, different entities. The church and the world have different lords, different lifestyles, different values. And so we've got to never accept and be comfortable with the idea of the world being in the Lord's church. Now, you may think that's a pretty delicate balance to have to try and make, and I suppose it is. But it can be done. It must be done because Christ said it must be done. The basis of what we've been saying is simply this. Yes, the church is to be in the world. We're to mix and mingle with the world in their environment, the world. Don't withdraw from or hide from the world. Tackle it head on. Jesus said we've got to go out and be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, like the city that's set on the hill and the lamp that's on a stand, so all people can see it. But we've got to keep the principles of the world out of the church and out of us. Church also has a duty to withstand, to expose, to rebel or cry out against the wickedness and the sins of the world. So don't think that just because you get through the day without telling a lie or cheating or stealing or murdering somebody that you've done your duty. Because we are to go beyond those restraints and not doing certain things. We're supposed to get out there and do some things. And it's called promoting Jesus, preaching him to the world. Ephesians 5, we're getting short here. Ephesians 5 and verse 11, Paul said, "And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of the darkness, but rather expose them." You suppose world is completely interchangeable with the word darkness there? It is. So we must take a visible stand against sin. Everybody needs to know, I stand against this or that. And believe me, there's plenty of things to keep us busy if we'll do that. Just look around you. We're surrounded by sin and sinful people. The church also must serve the world. Did you know that? Now that sounds out of context also, doesn't it? If the world is the sphere of Satan's influence, then why must we serve it? Because that's God's way. Matthew 20, verses 27 and 28, Jesus said to his disciples, "And whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." And Galatians 6 and 10 says, "Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith." We are to get out there and serve the world. Not work with them, promoting them, stuff like that. Serve them a good helping of the food of Christ. That platter. Spiritual food. But we've got to get out there and serve them. Christ came to serve the world, didn't he? He served up his platter. Some accepted it and ate and rejoiced. Some rejected it and went hungry and are still hungry. That's the kind of serving we're supposed to be doing. We should look for opportunities to serve the people around us and set that godly example. We're obligated to serve them and to do good things unto them, according to the Scriptures, and to try to lead them to Christ. So we've seen the relationship, the attitude that we're to have with the world. Let's go to John 15, verse 19 for our last reading. It very briefly discusses the attitude of the world towards the church. Here Jesus said, "If you were of the world would love its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, because of this the world hates you." Well, there's the attitude of the world toward the church, isn't it? It's hatred. We don't hate them, we the church. We hate their deeds, their sins, like God does, but we don't hate them. But they hate us just because we're a Christian. They don't even know us, but they hate us. We may get along fine with some of our neighbors and coworkers and classmates, but you just try, and you better try, preaching Christ to them one time and see how that relationship goes. Let's all think about something long and hard. Doesn't it appear as though the world, America included, is in what we could possibly call the post-Christian era? Ponder on that. And if you have to say, yeah, we are we, through lack of effort or ignoring or whatever else, are we contributing to that era? Or are we getting out there in the world doing what we can do to spread Jesus and his beautiful truth throughout the world around us? We've got to remember, we don't have to beat our head on the same wall all day long. When Jesus tried to plant a seed in someone, if they rejected him, he just walked away and planted it somewhere else. You don't have to beat your head on the same wall all day long. Find another wall. If anybody here is fighting a spiritual fight against the world or against anything, if you have any need or any desire, a prayer request or whatever you may want to share with this congregation today, make your need known while we stand and sing.